What up, though? It's your brother Mike X from 17 Winners Podcast. So I've been wanting to do that for every one of these workshops that we've had. But because of this one and the topic that we're going over today, leveraging podcasts without starting your own, I felt like it would be appropriate to use my podcast intro. But us outside of my podcast, I'd like to welcome you guys. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the program coordinator for Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Again, we are here to discuss leveraging podcasts without starting your own for the communications and narrative change pillar of MI-CEMI. First, I'm going to introduce Adam Grant. Adam Grant is the executive director of A Brighter Way. Um, he also, the reason why he was brought to this podcast, to this panel, was because he used podcasts to amplify his story upon coming home during the pandemic. He'll talk to you a little bit more about that when he gets his opportunity. We also have Josh Ho with us, who is the former Josh. I'm not sure. I saw the last episode was a little while ago, so you did stop Incarceration Nation, right?
Decarceration Nation, definitely
Decarceration
not
Nation.
incarceration.
Right, right, right. I'm bad. My bad.
Yeah, we stopped. I stopped doing that about 2 years ago. I did it for 7 years.
Yeah, so his experience as a podcast host, as well as being featured on other podcasts, is what made us bring him here. And then Miss Marjon's experience as the podcast and communications backbone for Michigan Liberation. She has a wealth of experience as well because of her frustrations with mainstream media and being able to get our stories out. So, that being said, I want to jump right into it, you guys. My first question, and I will, since I introduced you with Adam first, I'm going to flip it, ladies first. Miss Marjan, with the unique power of podcasting as a medium for storytelling and movement building, why did you choose that um, for Michigan Liberation?
Well, let me just start briefly with my background. I have a communications background, so I was trying to get on FM radio as a radio personality. I was working for iHeart, but what had happened is it's so competitive. And at the time, I started podcasting when it first came out, so I nobody was doing it, but I
Hmm.
saw the power in it, and I just took the reins and I just started. That's how I got started. And so when I started doing communications for Michigan Liberation, we was doing the traditional stuff, y'all, press releases, media alerts. You know how we do, word of mouth, and it just seemed like we were reaching people, but we weren't reaching the masses. And so finally, I said, it took me having an interview with the press. I think it was one of the TV stations. It took like an hour and a half, but we only got like 2 minutes coverage. You see what I'm
Mm.
saying? Or if we would interview with the Free Press or Detroit News or whatever, you spend hours once again interviewing to only end up with something printed that you didn't even really agree to. So time wasted. So I said, you know what? We're gonna get on here. We're gonna just start podcasting, talking. It's uncut, and that's what we did. And I got to give a shout out to Leslie McGraw. She's been on the podcast. That just shows you the power. And she's a journalist, but she turned back around and told her story. And I expect to work with all of y'all, to get on our podcast. But everybody who does podcast knows it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it takes a team, and it can be exhausting. But I have seen the power in it. It is overwhelming because you have now with Michigan Liberation, people come to us to be on our podcast, whereas before I was chasing guests. But now
Hmm.
I've had to take a hiatus so I don't lose my mind. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, y'all.
For sure, for sure.
A lot of
Uh,
coffee.
Adam, I want to go to you because your story is a little bit more unique in that you came home during a time where technology was kind of the only route of like expression. Um, it was almost impossible to get to physical people. So tell me a little bit about your experience, why you chose going into podcasts as a way to tell your story.
Well, I mean, everybody's story is unique in its own way. I came home January 8th of 2020. The world shut down in March. But also remember that I went in the year before the internet launched.
Mhm.
So when I came out, all technology was new to me. but I was hungry to learn it. The biggest thing is the same thing that everybody deals with when they come out on parole. When you come out on parole, you're not even allowed to leave the state. And so I realized that I could leave the country with podcasts. I was doing podcasts overseas in Australia and New Zealand and Great Britain, and getting things published in Portugal. I mean, the world was my oyster. When everybody else was freaking out about being locked down, I felt like I was on even ground, if not better than everybody else in that situation, because I was prepared for it. But the podcasts are also this idea of turning pain into purpose. Being able to go out there and not just do this trauma porn that we see sometimes, but to go out there, share a story, and share a story of what has been overcome, not just what has been endured, to me was a really powerful message, and it resonates with people. Sometimes our voice resonates with somebody who would never ask it. It's like being in a room and you ask a question that you probably know the answer to, but you ask it because somebody else might not ask the question. And I think that's what podcasts are for me, is they're the voice of the common person. And like you said, you're not getting it boiled down a 2-hour interview into a minute and a half on the sound bites they want to focus on.
That's real. That's real. Josh, for you, Miss Marjon said something that really resonated with me as a podcaster, and that is podcasting is not an easy thing to do. Like in building, when you think podcasting, when people think podcast, I literally deal with phone calls from people saying, "Hey man, me and my cousin had a great conversation. We're gonna start a podcast," right? People believe that it's just a light lift. From your perspective, what made you take on the work and do the work of podcasting versus, I guess, any other medium?
Well, I guess there's really two parts to that. I mean, at first it was because I was a little bit naive, and I started very early when podcasting was relatively young. Like I said, I did it for 7 years, and I've quit for a couple of years, mostly because of what the other guests have already said, which is that it's an extreme amount of work, and I just didn't have the ability to continue to do the podcasting and do my regular job, which requires, I travel a lot, and it just was too much after 7 years. But the first part is that I was looking, when I first got out of prison, I was looking for something to kind of communicate my kind of unique skill set, which is kind of like explaining to people complicated data sets and things like that. I think what I do very well, I hope, in general, is message complex stuff in a way that people can understand. And my goal really wasn't to reach millions of people, even at the beginning. It was to reach our people and help educate them on the data side of it, reach the rest of the criminal justice community in terms of, academics and things like that, so that they would all be up on what everyone else was doing. And then hopefully get some people who are out there who don't have experience, who would learn some stuff about what we were talking about. And I wasn't ever trying to make money. I wasn't ever trying to, and I never did. And I wasn't trying to, I was just trying to do a very specific set of things. And the only reason I started doing it is because I was also blogging at the time, and I was writing about a television show totally unrelated to criminal justice called Mr. Robot. And someone asked me to be on their podcast to talk about it because I had gotten some notoriety for solving a twist like a month in advance of the show. And so I got on some podcasts, and I realized I had some talent for that. And so I was just like, well, what are the entry costs? And there's a real difference between the entry costs of podcasting, which are fairly low and are very easy, and actually getting your podcast sustainable and doing the work that's necessary. And especially if you're trying to reach a large audience, the amount of work that's necessary to do that. But I saw originally that there was a very low entry cost, and I could afford a low entry cost at that
For
time.
sure.
I was pretty much just back from prison. And so I got myself a mic, and I had a computer, and that was pretty much it. And but I very quickly learned that it is very complicated. There is a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of things you don't consider, like sound quality and things like that. And then it's the marketing of it. I mean, there's tens of thousands of podcasts out, hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. and competing in that, just putting your things out there. I mean, it's like winning the lottery if you actually get a mainstream audience. And that's not really to say that your podcast isn't good. It's just there's 100,000 podcasts out there. How does anybody find you? And you have to figure that out.
For sure, I appreciate that, especially the last point when you talk about like the marketing and being able to get further out there. Because my next prompt is about the leveraging podcasts, especially from, of course, we recognize the podcast has a low entry cost, right? But once we get to getting into the real work of it, it becomes a lot more expensive. So I want to talk a little bit to the point of being able to kind of usurp those continued working costs by doing collaborations and connecting on other shows. Adam, I want to start you off with that one, bro. How did you become a guest on so many podcasts? Where did they find you?
I found them.
Okay.
It's an interesting. I mean, the world got really small and got really big all at the same time. So, like, I had just got my first job. One of the first things that I did, Josh talked about low entry cost. One of my first paychecks, I bought a speaker with a microphone because my plan was to go everywhere to share my story. I live in Lansing, so I was going to show up at the Capitol every chance I got, and everything shut down. So that didn't shut down the fact that I felt that the story needed to get out there, that these discussions needed to be had. So I went out and sought them. And as I sought them, you did these small introduction interviews. Everybody was learning about Zoom. I remember, I don't know if you remember this one, Chuck, when we got photo bombed early in the Zoom era. And so we were all learning about how to do this, and everybody was starting a podcast in 2020. So it really wasn't that difficult to find, places to be able to share my story. And I was kind of indiscriminate about it in the beginning. After a while, I started to, figure out where I wanted to share that story, who I wanted to share that story, and what was the purpose behind sharing that story. So then people started to be able to find their way to me. So they were talking about different aspects, not just about my incarceration, but it became about what I was overcoming and what were my mindsets coming out, of prison. So it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing where very many of them found me in the beginning, but I was finding everything. But of course, that's the way I approached the end of my incarceration anyway. It was like a treasure hunt. I was trying to find as many things as I could, learn as many things as I could, and it wasn't about to be any different out here once I had the chains taken off.
I agree. I agree. Josh, same question to you. Have you done any collaborations or any partnerships or shown up on any other podcasts? And how did you make those connections?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is yes. There's a long list if you go to my decarcerationnation.com, there's a press page and it has a long list of all the things, which are similar to what Adam did. And I think anyone who's done time knows that there are good things and bad things about being incarcerated, mostly bad. But one of the things you definitely, I think, come away from being incarcerated with is hustle, and searching out opportunities and trying to make things happen. And, I mean, I definitely think that, a good part of it is being willing to put yourself out there to go search out the other people who are talking about the things that you want to talk about and try to become part of those conversations. In my case, it kind of built organically because out of total luck, I was working at an organization that doesn't exist anymore in the Ann Arbor area. And the person who was running, I was a volunteer, I wasn't getting paid or anything. And the person who was leading that organization was supposed to go to a conference and didn't go. And she one day she pokes her head out and she looks at me, she says, "Hey, would you like to go to a conference in DC?" And I was like, "Sure." And I didn't even know if my parole officer was going to let me or whatever, but whatever, everyone's been through that process. And then so I went. And kind of what I decided at that time is that every single person at that conference, I was going to meet every single person at that conference. That, no matter what happened, I was going to make connections with everyone. And I did. I literally talked to every single person, and I mean, maybe one or two people escaped, but for good or for ill. And those started that was actually a very important conference, and it was a precursor to what's become the Clean Slate Initiative. It was the very first conference they ever had before there even was a Clean Slate Initiative. And so I met a ton of people from a ton of organizations all over the country. And then whenever they needed, criminal justice expertise from someone who'd done time, a lot of times they would ask me. And so, I could be on a lot of podcasts and get interviewed on a lot of things. I even had like a Politico magazine story about me at one point, which is kind of crazy. And so, yeah, that's it. I think it's just hustle and being willing to put yourself out there.
Man, I appreciate that. You said literally a mouthful. Especially when it came to like how long you've been doing podcasting. I remember, to Adam's point, I was reading about, I had the podcasting for dummies back in 2014 before I got out of prison. I didn't actually start podcasting until about 2019, because there was a disconnect between my transition home and what I learned inside. Um, but I also appreciate the hustle in being able to make the connections to get on podcasts or collaborate with guests. Miss Marjon, continuing in that vein, I just wanted to ask, because you made a point earlier about you started just talking, right? And eventually the people that you were chasing for guests kind of came back and want to be guests on your podcast, right? They want to talk to you now, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
you're
Go
right,
ahead.
Mike. And so much, I feel the love in this room. Podcasting is my passion, y'all. So I'm so excited. I know we all gonna be working together. But just like Josh said, I need a break. You know what I'm saying? Let me get my self-care on and then let's all come together, man. I've seen Adam in so many circles and stuff, and Mike, you and Chuck. I'm so excited. This is a new season, and I know we're gonna do some amazing things. And the reason I say that, I'm telling all of y'all on here, I have seen podcasts evolve to the point now it is a beast. It's half and half statistically as far as with FM radio. FM radio is still the king, but people are sick of hearing the same songs over and over, okay? And people are going to podcasting. And I got some two situations, Mike, real quick to share with y'all. But as far as partnerships, I'm now making money doing podcasting. See what I'm saying? And I'm gonna tell you two ways. First, I just did a contract with Royal Oak, City of Royal Oak. They hired me to do their podcast for Juneteenth. Just like Adam said, you become a subject matter expert in your area if you just stay
Mhm.
consistent. Josh know that too. Y'all know that. Whatever it is, stay in your lane and be consistent. If you are a criminal justice advocate, don't be jumping over into basket weaving. You can do that. But I've been guests on other people's podcasts, for example, caregiving, because I caregived for my boyfriend this year before he passed. Little did I didn't know. I'm like, I don't know nothing about. I hope don't ask me about Medicaid and Medicare, but I'm telling you, I just got on there and told my story. But like I said, with Royal Oak, it was a three-part series. I I'm no Juneteenth expert, but the thing is, they had heard about us doing Respect the Roots for Michigan Liberation, and they paid me to do it, and I went in, and I'm gonna tell you, y'all, a lot of this stuff we can learn together. There's no manual, there's really no class. You just kind of put yourself out there, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't, you try something else. I have even done a situation, y'all, where I've seen some people on social media and I've reached out to them and said, let me tell you something, be on my podcast, either mine or Michigan Lives. I'm going to write a press release with the podcast and we're going to then send it out to the media. And we did that. For example, Mario Green, unfortunately, the young man that killed his wife at Henry Ford Hospital. Well, I found his ex-girlfriend. I'm like, let's get on podcast. Did it, Channel 7, everybody wanted her, and then now it's at 50,000 views.
Mm.
Not under now she did it with me in Michigan Lib, and it got it's like about 300 some views there, but I'm talking about Channel 7's platform is now at 53,000. It's only been 3 weeks. So I say all that to say this is how I go back to funders. You see what I'm saying? This is where not only do you get hired, produce for podcasts, or me in my situation, I go to our funders, say, look, be on our show. And then that helps with the money because it takes a long time. And Josh, and I mean, everybody y'all know it takes a long time to get viewers and followers. There's no manual behind that. But if I tell you right now, I can give you this and you give me this amount of money, it's easier to get sponsorship and get paid to be a podcast producer or subject matter expert. So I just had to throw that out, Mike, because I know a lot of people on here probably want a podcast. They do podcasts, but besides burning you out, hell, how do you make money off of this? Or sustain
Yeah, I
it going?
appreciate everything that I'm hearing. I've been
I'm
getting so much
serious.
information. I thought I was teaching, but I'm learning as
No,
much as I'm
I'm
helping
sorry.
others to
Getting on
learn.
my soul. We all in this group right here. How many on here? It's like 33. We're all our own subject matter experts. I could
For
put
sure.
Adam on. Adam's. I've heard Adam's story is powerful. Then and Josh too. We don't look like what we all been through, right? Whatever it is, and you'll be surprised how people will pay you. They'll sponsor you just to tell your story.
Well, I'm
And
glad
like,
you said that because the next prompt is actually building off of that, especially where you talked about leveraging like other platforms. Chuck even mentioned it in the chat, being able to, okay, what I did on my platform, being able to serve as a platform for others to grab clips and little pieces from what we do on the podcast side, and then amplify it through mainstream news or other level focused media. So I appreciate that. Um, so my next question, when it comes to amplifying stories. Miss Marjon, you just kind of gave us one. Adam or Josh, either of you want to jump in on this one and just kind of talk about how maybe a story that you've told or conversation that you've had has been amplified through another platform?
Adam?
I can you still hear me? I got disconnected for a minute, so I'm making sure. All right.
Good.
Um, I mean, I think there's a constant amplification of certain things. One of the things that I thought was interesting was like when we were able to buy a house for a brighter way. Is it's one thing for word of mouth to spread, but to really be able to talk about it and talk about what the vision was for it, and to talk about that we didn't have all the traditional things in place that people thought you would have to have in place to be able to do that. I noticed within a matter of weeks that the conversation around housing and transitional housing for people who are formerly incarcerated changed immediately because people couldn't say we can't do that anymore. All of a sudden they were like, well, Brighter Way did it. So now the conversation started to change. So to me, the conversations that take place on the podcast, the main thing that they do is they serve as tinder for bigger conversations that are going to take place. Just like the idea with going on the Channel 7 News, 300 and some views on the MyLib, 53,000 on the others. Those all add together. That's an amplification factor. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to go out there. I think there's also another side about it sometimes that especially, we've been talking about communication. We did the MJF thing not too long, and we talk about the ops sometimes. We got to remember this, though, too. When we put messages out there, the ops are going to take those things and amplify the things that were less than well spoken on, too, and especially if we have the wrong people speaking on our behalf sometimes. So we really have to be careful about that and really be, I always say at ABW, to be conscious, deliberate, and intentional. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be anytime that we open our mouth, but especially if we have a microphone in front of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's like several things that whole thing makes me say. First, on the idea of the ops, I mean, just a few months ago, I was very lucky. I wasn't trying to build like my goal with my podcast wasn't to have hundreds of thousands of views. It was to have thousands of views, and it did, which I was fine with. But I had really, really high level guests. I still don't understand how, but I was very lucky to get, every from senators to lieutenant governor to the former Supreme Court, Chief Justice Supreme Court multiple times, stuff like that. But here's the thing, one of the guests I had on there, Vincent Schiraldi, who until recently was the head of probation in Baltimore and is kind of a national expert on parole and probation. Sinclair Media was going after him, and so they came after me for a little while too. And so you have to be like, when you go into all of this stuff, you have to be aware like you're saying, that the audience you want isn't the only audience that's going to listen. And you have to understand that you're making yourself to some extent a public figure, and you have to be ready to exist in the space where sometimes that's going to be controversial. And I think Adam is right too, that you have to be really thoughtful about how you represent in that space. Get some media training, do some, do those kind of things, because if you're going to be out there and you're going to put yourself out there, there are going to come times when that's going to be very stressful. And there are times when you'll come under a microscope, especially in the current environment, doing the kind of work that we do. The second thing is, I look at everything I do kind of as, and I hate to use this language because it's, I don't know if this is the best language for it, but I think of every little piece of the work that I do as part of a brand that I'm trying to keep consistent. So like, yes, I had a podcast for a long time, but I was probably best known for my social media presence on the old Twitter before it became X. I'm now on Blue Sky because obviously X is not my favorite place in the world. But you know, a lot of the work I did, was consistent. I tried to be the same person. I try to always be the same person. If I'm doing the work in organizations I'm working on, if I'm on social media, if I'm on my podcast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I really like what Mr. Marjon said earlier about finding your lane, staying in your lane. I really try to live by that. I want people to know me as a policy expert, and when they need a policy expert who has direct experience, I'm a good person to come from. That's my brand. My brand is explaining stuff to people who don't necessarily know criminal justice data and information. That's, and so that's what those are the two things that I thought of that question.
Sure, for sure. I appreciate that. This next thing that came to mind as an organizer, right? And I think I'm going to aim this one first at Miss Marjan, because as organizers, um, the motto is the people are in the street. You can't organize on the internet, right? Um, but I've found that with podcasting, you're allowed to go a little deeper than, say, a social media or, other means of getting people, newsletters or whatever. So I want you to speak a little bit to building community through podcasting, or what's your experience with that?
Right. I used to say to myself, I am not an organizer, y'all. I am a communicator. I started off at Michigan Lib as a public relations part-time person, and I had another job on the side, just like Josh said. And I was like, I didn't sign up for all this, but let me tell you, because of podcasting, y'all, I have had to not title myself. I'm a digital organizer, y'all. That's what you become. And I've even had to get at the same table with our executive directors and our partners with the funding part. It used to be a time where your executive directors, they did the funding. Now they bring in the comps people, the podcaster people, me, because guess what? Funders are saying, I want to give you money. I saw y'all podcast. You see what I'm saying? And it's like, well, Miss Marjon, can you come to this funding meeting? Or Miss Marjon, can you go to the funding event? And I'm like, Lord have mercy. So I say all that to say you do become an organizer, a digital organizer, because everybody, like Adam said, during COVID, that shifted everything online. You still got some people who don't want to be around people. They're still wearing their masks. So everybody's on their phone. Go somewhere today. Everybody's on their phone. So that's the way of the world. So it's been times I've been up in my room and my mother's downstairs. She'll be here and I hear her listening to one of my videos or something. And she's in her 70s. So it's reaching the masses. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. It's gone are the days of the traditional. I don't even hardly write press releases. I have to be honest, press releases and media alerts no more. I just go straight to the podcast, or we do reels or videos or digital stuff, and that's been more successful in 2025. And I'm telling you, y'all, it has helped us with funding. It has helped us build partnerships, reach the masses. People, it's easier to send a link to a podcast episode. Like I said, I did it with Mario Green's ex-girlfriend, and that was just my own little personal case study to figure out, because we're so busy maybe in one area that it's like, okay, let's tap into another area. You know what I mean? Most of the
Right.
people on here, Leslie, everybody know I've interviewed, besides just people fresh out of prison, family members, people who are indirectly connected with the criminal justice system. So, and another thing about podcasting, it allows you, unlike if you're on the radio or something like that or TV, to be a loosey goosey. You're still in your lane, but you're allowed to kind of say, okay, you know what, this season we focused on this area. Next season we're gonna go after this. You know what I'm saying? Like the last episode I did for our season 3 was with a young lady that was fresh out of Huron Valley. I had never interviewed. I had interviewed a lot of the gentlemen, the men out of prison, but I had never interviewed a female out of prison. That took 2 episodes because she was like, I don't care what I say. You see what I'm saying? I was ready. She drove 2 hours for that interview. And so I'm telling you, y'all, I'm so excited. I know I'm going a little bit over, Mike, but I'm now a part of a prison ministry because I'm trying to get podcasting in the prisons in Michigan.
Okay, okay.
So I do have to push back on something though that you said, Michael, with love. You said you can't organize on the internet. I totally disagree. I couldn't disagree more. I'll give you some examples. The first one, a lot of people, maybe some of the people on this call, but many years ago when COVID broke, a group of us got together and we decided to do an action that was entirely online to try to bring attention to the lack of vaccines in Michigan prisons. And we did a 2-hour. We got 100 people together. We trained them, and we did a 2-hour thing on Twitter, back when it was Twitter, and it trended #1 nationally and obviously #1 in the state. The next day, the governor got asked about it at a press conference about our action, and the day after that, she okayed vaccines to go into prisons. I'm not saying we're the only factor in that, but we definitely brought a lot of attention to it. There was press, there was all kinds of things. That all happened on the internet. That didn't happen somewhere else. A couple of years ago, me and a couple other people got together and we did a 24-hour Twitter-thon is what we called it for CARES Act home confinement. A lot of people were sent home from federal prison across the country and allowed to stay there as long as they followed a bunch of rules. And a bunch of Republican legislators were trying to revoke that and bring them back to prison, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. And so for 24 hours, me and a bunch of other Twitter influencers got online and just ran it. We were just trading off, so that we could each get a couple hours of rest. And we went. We got a lot of press coverage. We got a lot of, I'm not saying there were a lot of other people fighting for that to keep those people out, but we kept them out until they got commutations at the end of the Biden administration. So, I understand that, as someone who has done organizing out in the streets, I agree that, the people are out in the streets, but they're also online. And the first time I really got ideas about this was back when they first put out the Pokemon game for your phone. And I saw people walking all over the world out in the middle of nowhere, holding their phone up, looking for Pokemon. If you can move people out to look for Pokemon, you can move people out to do whatever you need them to do if you're effective at organizing on digital.
For sure. I appreciate that, Josh.
I want to add one piece to that, Mike.
Go ahead.
One piece. I just want to think about this. In a day and age where we're talking about algorithms and the news finding you, it doesn't make any sense for us not to have a strong presence on here because our voice does find its way. Just like I said that they weren't finding me, I was finding them. It's the same way. If we put these things out there, people will come across it. One of the things I love about our name, A Brighter Way, is you never know who's just going to randomly come across our site, who's going to come across one of our podcasts or something like that, looking for something positive. And all of a sudden they get hit upside the head with something that may not appear to be positive, but it is. So I think it's not Slack. Every tool that you can possibly use. I mean, my t-shirt game is activism. It inspired a conversation today, so anytime we put ourselves out there and becomes, there is an active component of it. Now there's a difference between that and slacktivism. And I think that's a little bit of what you were talking about too, where some people don't want to do anything else. But I think you're talking about a crew of people who are constantly doing it. I know Josh does it on a regular basis. I've seen Miss Marjon in action. She don't shy away from something. She talking about Leslie on here. Leslie don't play. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of people that I'm inspired by on a regular basis, and some of that is I don't get a chance to see y'all in person a lot, but I see what you do out there online.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, first and foremost, I appreciate both of what all of you said as far as that goes. And when I made the comment, I was making it as an antagonist. I know we organize on, but I wanted to make sure that we were able to amplify that part of it. So thank you guys for that perspective on it. I also want to kind of tap back to Joe though, because of his experience as a podcast host. You talked about all of the different guests you had on a podcast. Um, and because we're talking about leveraging podcasts without having to be the host of it or the owner of the podcast, I'm interested in what made you choose the guests that you chose. Because I have my own selection process right when it comes to my guests. What makes you choose a guest, or what makes a good guest to be on a podcast from your perspective?
I mean, a lot of it has to do with having, again, a well-defined lane. You're going to know who the people, like if you're doing a podcast where your whole purpose of your podcast is lifting up stories who are coming back from incarceration, that's the people who you're going to be looking for. In my case, it was more to try to both so there's a vast majority of data and stuff on criminal justice reform. And as much as I spend, 80 a ridiculous amount of my time reading studies, there's always new stuff coming out. And so one of the ways that I realized, and I'll admit this is somewhat of a grift, when I first came out, is I didn't have money to go buy books. And one thing you learn very quickly if your podcast has any listeners at all, is that they'll send you free books if you'll have their people on. And so I would basically, I hate to say it, but a lot of times I would look at what books were coming out and figure out which ones were ones I wanted to read, and the reasons were because the information then was going to help me with my work and help other people understand what was going on. And so, it was a synergy in a sense to create. It was a win-win. I would find the authors I wanted to talk to. Book publishers want their authors on podcasts, so they'll send you their book, and then I'd get to talk to that author and and a lot of times develop a relationship with them that would last past that time, where I could still call them later and ask them questions about work or other work that was related to things that they've done. And so for me, it was a little bit of me trying to get as much good free stuff as I could. A little bit of it was trying to meet people that I really wanted to meet and learn all of their stuff. So I had it in my head, and then I could share it with everybody else was the third thing. Get it out there so everybody else had the benefit of meeting that person and learning what the research they've been doing told us about where we were in terms of the criminal justice system, et cetera. And so, that was it. I mean, I wish, sometimes, I mean, later, I would get, the truth is there were only about 3 or 4 people who ever said no, which is really shocking to me, given my background and all that kind of stuff. Uh, and I just started, kind of what Adam was talking about. I just started doing cold outreach when I first started in it, and people would just say yes. And and it just built from there. And I just kept asking people. I'd find them on social media and I'd be like, hey, I've been reading this, I've been reading that. How would you like to come on my podcast and talk about it? Almost always they'd say yes. So I just got really lucky and had, like I said earlier, kind of a hustle mentality. And I was trying to create synergies for myself and for my audience.
So it sounds like having some level of a hook is a good way to get onto podcasts. Like, I got a book or I have this thing to talk about is a good way for you to be able to get on the podcast. Ms. Marjan, kind of same question. What makes a podcast guest someone that you would want to talk to, or how do I get on a podcast?
Okay. Well, I think it just depends. I usually start off with a goal, before we start a new season, because, if you're not careful, you start in one lane, next, you done veered off into a whole nother, the side of the freeway. And the reason I say that, the first season, like a Michigan Liberation, it was just to introduce who Michigan Liberation was, our staff, our campaigns. The next season we did different. We got a little fun with it. Our third season, we kind of stayed in our lane. We veered off a little bit. We did a series called Life After Lockup. Interviewed some family members. And like I said, ended the third season, which was the last season, with a lady who had just gotten out of Huron Valley. So now we're at our fourth season. But as far as guests, I usually go after people that, first of all, I go back to our mission and vision. What are we trying to do in mass incarceration, and how are we going to do that through our narrative, our messaging? And that's why, maybe also with Michigan Liberation, another thing that makes us slightly different, besides being a grassroots organization, we also pivot come electoral time and do endorsements. We have a C4. So, but because of legal reasons, I have to be careful because we can't like just go and interview people that we're endorsing. You know what I mean? I've tried it, but we've looked at now what we probably going to end up doing on the podcast is educating people, going back to civic education. A lot of people don't even know what a commissioner does or what a prosecutor's role is. Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court versus the big Supreme Court. Educating people more so, and then also allowing people to still in the between tell their story. So with once you know your goal, then you kind of go after your guests, and like Josh said, some people it may say no in a direct or indirect way, but then a lot of times I've noticed when you are kind of on point or on goal, they tend to want to be a part of it. I think now with podcasting with me, it's more so strategically finding the right fit. Let me tell you, I done had some people as guests. I wish they had said no because, man, and I'm thank God I pre-recorded because it was one. I'm telling you, it was a couple of them. We even with a I try to give people their space, but I had one person, man, it was so. By the time the end of the interview, she had told me she was pretty much a prostitute. She was. I'm like, okay, you or, and I'm no judgment, but it was like the whole purpose of the interview was to talk about advocacy, but she went off into sex trafficking, and she's in Vegas, and she's got appointments. It was crazy, y'all. Some people get in front of that mic and they lose it. You know what
Lose
I'm
it.
saying? And I've had some people. I told them, you know what? Let's That's why now I'll have a one-on-one first before I just start recording. Because some people, if they know they live, oh my goodness. You know,
Just go. I
yeah, that's
like
why
that. You actually helped me
y'all feel me,
transition.
y'all. Some people ain't we got some bomber and we in a 2025 where everybody ain't your friend. They'll
For
pretend
sure.
like they are, and then they'll flip on you. Well, how do you feel about reform? Why you say
Mm,
no.
for sure.
See,
For sure.
lost control. And let me tell you something. I've had a situation now. It was on my personal podcast where something like that happened. I had two guests actually cuss each other out over
Mm,
a relationship opinion. So I learned from that, okay, so we don't have that problem with Michigan Live. We need to have a little bit more like a one-on-one first, and then we'll get on in the podcast room so there's no surprises. You still have that room to be creative, but no surprises. So I'm just saying, I know I added a little bit more to your question, Mike, but yeah. So now
for sure.
I have a goal in mind. So if I'm looking for somebody that can speak on, let's say, ending cash bail, I'm gonna go after people that kind of fall in that realm. If I'm gonna talk about expungement and clean slate, I'm gonna go after that. Maybe China or the CEO of I strategically kind of first just get somebody out in left field that next thing you done lost total control of the narrative.
Well, like I said, I like what you were saying about losing control of the conversation and having like wild guests. Somebody who has been a repeated good guest on podcasts is Adam. So Chuck put in the chat cold outreach for the win. Does that work to get on a podcast as well? And Adam spoke to it a little bit, but I want you to kind of elaborate further on you going to them to get on the podcast, Adam, and how that worked out.
Well, first off, Miss Marjon's got me wondering if there might be a couple people out there who regret putting me on their podcast too, because I don't completely wow out, but I will a little bit. I think it kind of works, but I think also once you've been there for a minute, then you also have some content to be able to share with them. So one of the things that I started doing is just putting, a list of all the links together of things that I've been on. So you've got an idea of what you're going to get. when you put me on there. If you want somebody who's real, if you want somebody who's authentic, if you want somebody who will answer any question that you put out there, then I'm a pretty good interview. If you want somebody who's going to say certain things and his opinion's not going to evolve and it's not going to change, then you might want to go with somebody else. But I've let you know what's available out there. But I think a lot of times too, you know, one of the things Josh said in the comments that I saw is that one of the things you got to worry about is if you've got somebody who just writes really well, but then they just can't speak. You know, I mean, a podcast is that, even especially if it's one that doesn't have visuals. You better have something engaging about the way that you do things. I know people that have really good content, but they talk like Bueller. You know, it's like everything's in a monotone. So you fall asleep after about 3 minutes of the interview. I'm going to take you through some things. I hope I make you feel some things. And I think that's one of the things people want right now is they want to feel inspired. They want to feel like Josh said, they want to feel like they understand something better at the end of it. And they want to know that you believed it. They want to know that you believed it. So I'm not going to go on anything and I'm not going to come to you about getting on your show if I don't believe in the format that you're doing anyway. So I think it also strokes the ego a little bit when you come to them like, I'd really like to be on your show, because they know you've been paying attention.
For sure, for sure. I actually have a question from the chat that leads us into the next part. Of course, we're talking about changing narratives around criminal legal reform on through podcasting. Um, but on the next step level, Jessica Best asked the question, are there any resources you would recommend first-time podcast guests use to prepare themselves for this type of public speaking? And that question is going to be in general. Anything that you suggest, either one of you, I see Ms. Marjon already nodding, so I'm gonna let you take the floor first. Would you
Yeah.
suggest a person who has never been on a podcast before do in preparation?
Okay, there are some like basic one-on-ones, and that's if you it depend on what level you're trying to podcast. For example, some podcasts you're not going to be on TV, you know what I mean, or on a screen. You're just going to be audio. And if that's the case, making sure, of course, basic stuff like you're in a, of course, you can't be in a studio maybe, but if you're in your home or office, make sure you have a as much as possible quiet environment. That makes sense. Okay, so let's start with just audio real quick, making sure that you're in a sound, the door is closed. I have a dog. He just opened the door. He's like, no, there is no closed doors in this house. So making sure that your door is closed. You got understanding with, if you live with other people, that you're going to be in a podcast recording. Also have some talking points. Like I said, you want to make sure that, because you may get into talking. We all get excited and get to talking and rambling off, but you want to make sure you hit those points,
As
and
a
so
guest
therefore,
or as the the
as a
the
guest,
okay,
as the guest and as the host,
host, okay.
both, but definitely as a guest, because as a guest, you want to make sure, especially if you represent an organization or a brand, that you're getting that mission, vision, and key points out. So, for
Yeah.
example, I'll use me as example. When I represent Michigan Live, I'm making sure that I talk about our vision, mission, and ending cash bail. After that, it's a free game. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Y'all know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. And then if it's other clients, I make sure that, like I told you, Royal Oak, it was Juneteenth, so I had to make sure that I hit certain, like they were having an event downtown in Royal Oak, so I had to keep plugging that. You know what I mean? Other than that, I allowed all their guests, whether it was their board, students, to say what they wanted to say. But in between, hey, don't forget, Juneteenth's coming. There's an event at the farmers, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So that's another thing. So making sure soundproof, making sure you have a talking points. Now, if you're going to be on video, of course, great lighting. I'm gonna be honest. I got this from, I don't know if y'all can see because I'm in blurred screen. That's another thing. I'm in blurred screen, so it's kind of like I'll come off of it. This is a light, a ring light. Making sure you have some type of lighting. Even, this lighting in the back that you see is not really good on video. If you have a green screen, and here as I'm talking, more money's being involved. But if you're on a very strict budget, just making sure you have some good lighting. If your bed is not made in the back or whatever room, then you blur it out, and it's
Yeah.
okay. It's acceptable because people are not here to see you sit, standing, in front of the Taj Mahal. They want to hear the content and
Yeah.
everything. And as far as resources, you can, with AI, you can resource probably the best method to prepare for a podcast. If I find any like Jessica, I'll put it in the chat. But right now, I'm telling you the best way, and I know Josh and Adam can probably attest to this, is just start doing them.
For
And
sure.
you'll learn, I hate to say it, you'll learn what works and doesn't work for you.
Facts.
And that's
That's facts.
host wise and guest wise. You'll start realizing there's certain guests I just can't have. Like there's what people who can't control their mouth. Now Adam is cool. Adam has respect. I'm talking there is people who will get on your platform and they won't even let the host talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Adam, I want to ask you the same question. I see Kay Butler in the chat. If you can hold maybe 5 minutes for Adam and Josh to respond to this question, I
Because I
will open the
definitely
floor
had some
for
things to
questions.
say once Adam's.
Okay, for sure. And I will open the floor for questions for everyone. And Kay Butler, you will be the first one. So Adam, question. Same question that I gave Miss Marjon. I just got out. I'm trying to get on a podcast. So I'm just now wanting to get this message across, and I need to get it across on podcast. What resources, what do I need to start trying to get on those podcasts?
It's kind of like our motto. It's reentry through relationship. You need relationships. If you just came home, I don't know if the best thing for you to do is just to try and find a podcast. I mean, especially if you somebody who just came home, there's enough of us out there doing this that you can kind of cut your teeth on something and figure some things out, be mentored and be public at the same time. I mean, sometimes people want to get out and they want to have too big a thing. Like I came out with a speaker. I didn't come out with a PA system. I came out with a single speaker because I was going to share my, story at different places. I think Miss Marjan hit the nail on the head, though, is just do it, because that's one of the ways you're going to learn these things. You can learn a lot of things theoretically, and you can sit there and practice, and you can sit there and practice on a screen yourself and record yourself, and then all of a sudden you get into a real conversation, and none of that stuff works anymore. It's as simple as this. A podcast, the beauty of a podcast is it is a conversation. And if you can't have a conversation without a camera, don't turn the camera on, because I know some people that have come out here to do that, and you could not talk to me for 15 minutes before you got out. So let's figure that part out. It's all about relationship. There's got to be some kind of synergy. There's got to be something. I don't want to be on a situation where it's all contentious. I'm not going to go on something where all we're going to do is debate, and my whole point is to try and make you look foolish. I don't want somebody who fully agrees with everything I says and doesn't challenge some things with me too. So I think that's the other thing too, is you need to know what your strengths are. You need to know what your goal is in this. If you just want to talk for the point of talking, then you're in the wrong business. I had one of our members, every week she used to drop off her son so she could take care of a few things, and he'd just hang out with me. So I kind of mentored him just by example. And he said one day, you just talk for a living. I said, no. I said, I talk well for a living. I said, you talk all the time and don't nobody pay you. So I think that's what somebody needs to realize when they're coming out is, are you going to do this right? Are you going to represent well? Or are you just trying to be heard?
Appreciate that. Josh.
Yeah, first of all, and I think this is like, if I were going to say, if anything I've said on this whole thing, this is probably the most important thing, and it doesn't just relate to podcasts. I used to teach public speaking back in my previous career. This is something I think about all the time. If there's one thing that you need to learn more than anything else, it's how to say what you need to say within 2 minutes. I'm not saying I've always stuck to it here because we're kind of among friends, but if you see me in that environment, you'll see that, I had a mentor once who I would speak with sometimes, and she said, the interesting thing about you is if I tell you got 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you give me 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and getting to the point where you know how much time you're taking, you'll get better and better at being able to make sure that you're leaving space for the host, for the questions, for the flow, for all that kind of thing. And, because it's terrible, and I think Adam's right about this too, when you're on there and someone's just talking and talking and talking and talking. I think the other thing I hate is when, and this is the second thing I'll say, which is I think one mistake people make is they try to memorize. And you're not alive when you're reciting memorized text, unless you're like a professional actor. So you've got to know, you have to feel what you're saying. You have to understand the things you need to talk about, but you have to know how to say them in a way that is that connects with people. And the only way you can do that is by practicing with people. But you've got to have your heart in what you're talking about, and you have to be able to summarize things. So those are the two things I would say are the most important, and from my perspective.
And he came in at 2 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. I don't know whose hand came up first. Was it Jessica or Tara? But I have it in my notes as Jessica, so I'm going to let you ask the first question, Jessica.
Great, thank you. I'll be quick. Thank you for all the information about the resources. That was all really helpful. And you've already dedicated a lot of time to that, so we definitely don't have to belabor the point. Me coming from the university context, I'm a communications manager for a staff of like 50 researchers and academics, right? So if you all have any really quick tidbits or resources for the future about bringing it down to the human level, right? So not so much the production value stuff, but more of the lecturing in a class is a lot different than sitting in a podcast, right? So any resources you have about that type of preparation, particularly for experienced professionals who have egos, that would be great to hear about.
Either of my panelists want to tackle that one? That is actually a good question, because a lot of mine has been just off the cuff. I ask questions that are personal questions that I've either been asked, and because of having my lane, I know the conversation that I'm, or talking to other people outside, because my lane is literally directly connected to who I am as a person. But you having conversations with other people, how would you respond to that question from Jessica?
As far as taking like what's in the classroom and put it in podcast form, Jessica, is that what you're trying to do? Take what's being like a subject?
Yeah, partially. I think really what I'm asking about, right, is like we were talking about showing up to these podcasts as a guest from your humanity as a person, right? And in a way that's engaging your audience, which is very different than participating in a university class, say, or writing an academic research article. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about, right? Is like what is it that makes a guest really strong and engaging on that human level?
Right. I'll just give my little tidbit because I do podcasts, but I also do communications, and that's what I'm coming to this space in. Meaning, I've done the grassroots part of it, like doing the press releases, the content, and then switching over to podcasting, where I'm just kind of just freestyling, flowing. And the reason I say that is that you gotta make it. I think somebody said it earlier. I don't know if it was Adam or Josh. You got to make it engaging. You got to get that hook. You see what I'm saying? You already got to have a niche. In marketing, you got to know your target audience. You know what I'm saying? And there's usually a primary and a secondary target audience in marketing. A lot of people are like, oh, everybody's my audience. No, it isn't. It's usually two types of audiences. So if you can't just say millennials and everybody else. No, it's millennials or Gen Z or Gen X. So you see what I'm saying? And then maybe everybody else trickles in. And also your hook. Because like somebody said it earlier, there's a lot of podcasts out here, video and audio or whatever. So what makes your podcast good, or you as a podcaster makes you pop? You know what I'm saying? And one of the things is like I pride myself in being very transparent and very like the queen of convo in the deep. You know what I'm saying? So you got to kind of, meanwhile being in your lane. So as an educator, on the educator side, it's almost got to be something like if you're in social work, the top 10 steps to of something, the top 3 stuff, to make it grab, because I just did a vlog the other day where I did 7 steps that you know God is getting ready to bless you. I'm already at 600 views just out of a couple hours. You got to be constantly testing it, because what works on Monday may not work on Wednesday. You know what I mean? So you still staying in your lane, but you're getting a little flexible, if that makes sense. You might have to get some students involved. You may have to get some, educators of a diverse group of people speaking on your behalf, and make it catchy, so it's not so, like somebody said, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off type of talking.
So I worked in higher education for 25 years, so I'm very familiar with your situation. And I would tell you that the way that I lectured before I went to prison and the way that I lecture after I went to prison are dramatically different. And I don't think that prison was the thing. I think in a sense that I reflected back on the way communication happened when I was in higher education. So much of that happens when someone's a captive audience. Like if I'm a professor and I have a room full of people, it doesn't matter how interesting I am. They have to listen because they have to pass the test. They have to get their attendance. They have to do all that kind of stuff. When you're out here and you're trying to get people to listen to your podcast, you have to know your audience and you have to be interesting to them. If they're going to come back, it's got to be because you are doing something that they need to hear, not that they can hear, that they need to hear. Because like I said before, there's 100,000 podcasts out there. Why are they going to keep coming back to yours? So you've got to do things. I mean, you have to learn how to speak in ways that people want to hear. You have to take what used to be like, my academic background is political science, international relations, and philosophy. If I brought a philosopher in on my podcast and they started talking in academic philosopher language, my audience wouldn't have a damn idea what they're talking about. That's what I think, one of the things that I kind of found my niche was taking really complicated things like what those philosophers say and trying to break it down into human language and then translate it to people who might not otherwise know. Why is that important? How does it impact their life? Why do they need to hear this? Those are things that academics don't usually talk about. And so you have to get those people to reconsider, kind of like why I did, what they're trying to accomplish, and actually get them to be willing to be reflexive enough to say, am I accomplishing it? Like put it in front of some people, see if they actually think it's interesting. Be willing, those people have to be willing to take that criticism. I certainly had, I think I had to be too. But the way that you communicate to a mass audience or to specific mass parts of a mass audience are different than you do when you have a captive audience. That's the main thing I'd say. Adam?
A couple small things I would say. A podcast is not a tutorial. And the difference between facilitation and instruction. I think when you're doing a podcast or anything of that nature, then you end up having to, you have to facilitate a conversation. As an instructor, you have a tendency to instruct, so you're just conveying information. I always think about the basic means of why are you communicating? Are you trying to inform? Are you trying to entertain? Are you trying to convince? And I think in a podcast form, you're trying to do kind of all of those things. You don't have to entertain. Some instructors do, but you don't have to entertain at the front of the room because you have a natural built-in authority. Nobody's going to change the channel on you. So I think you have to have that facilitation thing. And that is hard to deal with sometimes when people have been teachers, when they've been instructors, and they've been in these structured environments for a long time because they're not used to facilitating, they're used to instructing.
Sure. And for the sake of time, I think I'm going to take our last question. But for the sake of this last question, let's give Kate Butler the opportunity to come back around and ask. The floor is yours, Kate.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Kiwana Butler. I am the author to Diary of an Inmate's Mother. Not trying to sell that, just wanted to introduce myself more professionally. Your thoughts on how to sort of infiltrate get involved with people who don't seem to be interested, yet there's a huge need.
From my perspective, the most important thing is to find out how to say things in words, in language that doesn't make people turn their brains off. There's all kinds of different ways that people will turn their brains off because of particular language. Sometimes it's because it's coded because of politics and stuff like that. So I think
Yeah.
a lot about how to say things differently than the words that people generally use. Like in many instances, when I'm with specific audiences, I won't use words like mass incarceration, even though I fully believe that we are in a system of mass incarceration. I try to find different ways to say the same things. Second is, I think, storytelling. The thing that brings people in, the reason, like, for instance, people were listening to Adam on the podcast that he was on, is because he was telling a story from the heart. And it wasn't about ultimately he may get to where he's saying these are the problems with prison, but before they've ever gotten to that, they've heard his story of his experience first. And stories can lead people into things in ways that just data can't. And I'm saying that as someone who spends an awful lot of time talking about data. And the third thing I think is you need to learn how to talk about data in ways that embed it in things that people care about. I just yesterday, someone in my organization asked me to write an organization sign-on letter for organizations on the right that we're going to join on for one of our campaigns to get housing discrimination stopped in Pennsylvania for people with drug convictions. And so I did a lot of work of just building the data into language that they would listen to. And so I just think that, as annoying as that may be, because to all of us, this is, when you say those things like domestic violence is very big, or, when we talk about mass incarceration, or we talk about, the incredible amount of Black and brown people in prison, to all of us, that makes total sense. But to a lot of people outside, they're not ready to hear it that way. And you have to kind of bring them to it. It sort of sucks that has to be the case, but that is the approach I generally try to take, is try to find ways to say things that will bring people in instead of push them away or get them to turn off their, brains just because of the words you're using.
My advice is kind of simple on that, is get to know people and let them get to know you. I mean, I think ultimately in a lot of these cases, when it started out, we were all social distancing and everything. So I had to be a little bit more aggressive with it, but I don't have to ask anybody to go on their show anymore. I don't have to ask anybody if I can speak at their event. People get to know you, and after a while, they get to know your story, and they get to know who you are as an individual, and they will want you to speak at those things. So I would say you might have to take a little bit more of the slow approach, because you used my favorite word, and that's infiltration. And you don't infiltrate by making a lot of noise. You infiltrate by getting in and then changing things,
Yeah.
while you're there. And I believe that you do that one relationship at a time.
Don't mean to jump in again, but I just wanted to add on to that. That Adam's 100% right. I like a lot of times try to think of what I do as like being part of a virus. I'm trying to infect people with what'll bring them over to our side.
Thank you all. Ms. Marjon, did you want to close?
No, just well, you know what? Just real quick, because I know we pressed for time. I tell people if you want to be a guest, and I mean you're a guest and you want to be on podcast, come up with your own bio, Adam, your own bio, your some pictures, decent pictures, and a title. Your brand, and then let people see it in a one pager. And then when you schedule that one on one with the podcaster, they can get to know you on that level. But sometimes people, I think, Kay, you said it, they're turned off by the word, the talking. The one pager is something, whether you're in education, if you're in a nonprofit or a corporation, at least get your foot in the door. You know what I'm saying? And everything. Yeah. So I think Chuck put in there, that is so key, because now the lady that I told you I use as a case management, she's my project. She has went from being in our podcast. She was featured on local, publications. Now she's getting ready. I'm helping her get set up to start speaking in Domestic Violence Month, which is in October. She's already getting gigs. So she's making her
Thank you.
money. You see what I'm saying? She's doing a bio. I had her answer some questions. We just got her bio. Her son took some pictures of her. Boom. That's a process of where it started as a podcast, major media coverage. Now she's getting ready to be act. She's already speaking as we speak, and it's overwhelming for her. You know what I mean? Because this is all new to her. But because time is of the essence sometimes with this stuff. So I just want to throw that out.
I appreciate everybody for showing up. I appreciate our panelists for showing up and giving us valuable information. Look forward to the next one. I think Ms. Marjan even gave me a couple of ideas for podcasts topics to talk about when we continue this series on podcasting. So that being said, I release you all back to your days and your lives. Have a great rest of your day.